The rope scratched against my throat as they fitted the noose, rough hemp that would soon steal my final breath. I stood on the wooden platform in the center of Paris, my hands bound behind my back, my white surcoat stripped away, reduced to a simple tunic that marked me as a condemned heretic rather than a knight of the temple. Below me, 10,000 faces stared upward, some with hatred, some with pity, some with the blank curiosity of those who had come merely to witness a spectacle. The charges still rang in my ears from the trial that had condemned me, consorting with demons, denying Christ, corrupting the faithful, crimes I had never committed but could not disprove against testimony purchased with the king's gold. Brother Matthias stood 3 paces away on his own platform, his face grey but calm, his lips moving in silent prayer. We were the last, the final 2 Templars to be executed in Philip's purge of our order, the concluding act in a persecution that had already consumed hundreds of our brothers. The executioner adjusted the rope one final time, and I looked out at the crowd, and I felt not fear or anger or even grief, but something unexpected, something that rose from a place deeper than my own will. Forgiveness for those who had brought me to this moment, mercy for those who were about to kill me. My name is Brother Jean de Valois, and I had served the temple for 32 years before the morning they came to arrest me. I was 51 years old, a senior knight with responsibilities for managing one of our commanderies in Normandy, a life of modest comfort and meaningful service that I had believed would continue until age or illness finally claimed me. I had joined the order at 19, a young man seeking purpose beyond the limited prospects available to a minor nobleman's 3rd son. The temple offered everything I wanted: a chance to serve God, to be part of something larger than myself, to live according to a code of honor and sacrifice that elevated existence above mere survival. I took my vows with absolute conviction, spoke my promises of poverty and chastity and obedience with a fervent belief that I was dedicating my life to the most important work possible. I spent 15 years in the Holy Land, fighting in battles whose outcomes barely shifted the slow erosion of Christian power, watching brothers die for inches of ground that would be lost again within months. And then I returned to France, was assigned to administrative duties, spent another 17 years managing estates and training young knights, and living a life that was peaceful, if not particularly dramatic. The arrests came on a Friday morning in October. Coordinated across all of France, hundreds of Templars seized simultaneously on orders from King Philip. His soldiers burst into our commandery at dawn, dragged us from our beds, read charges we could barely comprehend through our confusion and shock. Heresy, idolatry, corruption, crimes against God and the crown. We were marched to Paris in chains, thrown into dungeons beneath the royal palace, held without explanation while Philip's lawyers prepared the prosecution that would justify his seizure of the order's vast wealth. The trials were theatrical performances rather than genuine attempts at justice, testimony from witnesses who had been tortured or bribed, evidence fabricated or distorted, judges who had already decided our guilt before hearing a single word of defense. Some brothers confessed under torture, admitted to crimes they had never committed in desperate hope that cooperation might earn them mercy. Others maintained their innocence even as their bodies were broken, even as they faced certain death, even as the lies accumulated until truth seemed irrelevant compared to the political necessity of destroying the order. I refused to confess. Through weeks of interrogation, through threats and torture and promises that admission of guilt would earn me a swift death rather than slow suffering, I insisted on my innocence, on the order's faithfulness, on the truth that we were being destroyed not for our sins, but for our wealth and our inconvenience to a king who owed us vast debts he had no intention of repaying. My stubbornness earned me harsher treatment, longer sessions of torture, darker cells, less food, the constant message that I could end my suffering simply by admitting what they wanted me to admit. But I could not do it, could not sign documents that would slander my brothers and stain the reputation of an order I believed had served God faithfully, despite our human imperfections. Brother Matthias, who was imprisoned in the cell beside mine, whispered to me through the wall one night, "Why do you persist, Jean? We are condemned regardless of what we say. Confession will not save us, but it might ease our final days. Why suffer for pride when pride changes nothing?" I thought about his question for a long time before answering. I persist because truth matters even when truth cannot save us. I persist because our vows did not include a provision for lying when lying becomes convenient. I persist because if we all confess to crimes we did not commit, history will remember us as guilty, and that seems a worse death than anything they can do to our bodies. The torture finally stopped after 3 months, not because I had broken, but because Philip's lawyers had apparently gathered enough false testimony that my continued resistance no longer mattered. They brought me before a final tribunal, read my sentence without allowing me to speak, condemned me to death by hanging as an unrepentant heretic. Brother Matthias received the same sentence. We were the last, they told us, the final Templars whose public execution would close this chapter of Philip's purge, would demonstrate conclusively that the order had been corrupt and its destruction justified. They set the execution for a cold January morning, gave us 3 days to make peace with God, offered us one final chance to confess and perhaps earn a slightly less ignominious death. We both refused. We spent those 3 days in prayer and conversation, 2 old knights facing death together, trying to make sense of what had been done to us, to our brothers, to the order we had served faithfully. Brother Matthias was bitter, filled with rage at the injustice, convinced that God had abandoned us, or perhaps that God did not exist at all, since no just deity would permit such evil to triumph. I understood his anger, but could not share it. Found myself moving instead towards something I had not expected, a strange peace, an acceptance not of the charges against us, but of the reality that we were going to die, and nothing could prevent it. On the night before our execution, as we sat in our cells waiting for dawn, I heard Matthias weeping, and I spoke to him through the wall. "Brother, why do you weep?" His voice came back broken, hollow. "Because I am afraid, Jean. I'm afraid of the pain of dying, afraid of the judgment that may await beyond death, afraid that my entire life has been wasted in service to an order that was destroyed by lies, afraid that nothing I did mattered and I will be forgotten like all the others they have killed. How can you be calm when we face such an end?" I thought about his question, about the fear that was certainly present in my own heart, but somehow did not overwhelm the peace I felt, the certainty that even this unjust death could have meaning if I chose to give it meaning. "I am calm because I have decided to forgive them," I said, and I heard the words surprise me, even as I spoke them, revealing a truth I had not fully acknowledged until that moment. I forgive Philip for his greed and his lies. I forgive the judges who condemned us, knowing we were innocent. I forgive the executioner who will end our lives tomorrow. I forgive them all, because holding hatred in my heart as I die seems like giving them power over my final moments, and I will not grant them that. Matthias was silent for a long time, then spoke with something between wonder and disbelief. "How can you forgive them, Jean? They have destroyed everything we built, killed hundreds of our brothers, stained our honor with accusations we cannot refute. They do not deserve forgiveness. They deserve God's judgment and whatever punishment awaits the wicked." I understood his objection because I had felt the same way for months, had nursed my own anger and bitterness through the torture and the trial, had imagined elaborate revenge against those who had wronged us. But somewhere during those final days, anger had transformed into something else, had given way to a recognition that forgiveness was not about what our persecutors deserved, but about what I needed for my own soul, for my own peace as I approached death. "You are right that they do not deserve forgiveness," I agreed, "but Christ did not die only for those who deserved his mercy. He forgave his executioners while hanging on the cross, asked God to pardon them because they knew not what they did. If I claim to follow him, if my faith is real rather than just words I speak when faith is comfortable, then I must forgive as he forgave, must show mercy to those who show me none, must die without hatred poisoning my final moments." They came for us at dawn, led us through the streets to the platforms where we would hang, where the crowds had gathered to witness our deaths. I climbed the steps with legs that trembled but did not fail, stood in place while the executioner fitted the noose, looked out at the sea of faces and felt not anger toward them, but something like compassion, like sorrow for people who had been taught to hate men they did not know for crimes that had never been committed. The executioner was young, his hands shaking as he adjusted the rope, and I could see fear in his eyes, fear perhaps that we would curse him, would condemn him to hell for his participation in this injustice. I spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear. "I forgive you for what you are about to do. You are simply following orders, doing the work assigned to you. I hold no malice toward you, and I ask God to be merciful to you as he will be merciful to me." The executioner's hands froze, his eyes wide with shock, and he stepped back as though I had struck him. "You forgive me," he whispered. "After everything, after what they have done to you, after what I am about to do, you offer forgiveness." I nodded. "I offer forgiveness because it is all I have left to give, and because dying with hatred in my heart would be a greater defeat than anything you can inflict on my body." A priest stood near the platform, there to offer final rites, though we had been condemned as heretics and supposedly denied the comfort of the church. He approached me, his face troubled, and spoke in low tones. "Brother Jean, I must ask you, do you truly forgive those who have condemned you? Or are these just words spoken to impress the crowd, to earn some final measure of dignity?" I met his eyes and I spoke truth. I forgive them because Christ commanded it, because my vows included loving my enemies and praying for those who persecute me, because holding on to hatred as I die seems like the final betrayal of everything I claim to believe. Is my forgiveness perfect? No. Do I struggle with anger and bitterness even as I speak these words? Yes. But I choose forgiveness despite those struggles, decide to offer mercy even when every part of me wants to curse them, and that choice is the most genuine thing I have ever done. Adi. The priest's eyes filled with tears, and he blessed me though he had no authority to do so, spoke words of absolution over a man condemned as a heretic, and I felt grateful for his courage in offering comfort when offering it could bring him trouble. Brother Matthias stood on his platform, watching this exchange, and I saw something shift in his face, some of the bitterness drain away, some recognition that perhaps there was another way to face death beyond rage and despair. "Jean," he called across the space between our platforms, his voice carrying to the crowd below. "If you can forgive them, then perhaps I can as well. I do not have your faith, do not feel your peace, but I will not let you die alone in showing mercy. I forgive them too, the king, the judges, the executioner, all who have brought us to this place. I forgive them, and I ask God to be more merciful to them than they have been to us." The crowd murmured at his words, confusion and perhaps shame rippling through the assembled masses as they watched two condemned men offer forgiveness to those who were about to kill them. This was not how executions typically proceeded. Condemned heretics were supposed to curse their accusers, to rage against their fate, to provide drama and confirmation that they deserved their punishment. We were offering something different, something that did not fit the narrative Philip's lawyers had constructed. The moment came for the execution. The executioner moved behind me, his hand on the lever that would drop the platform and leave me hanging, and I closed my eyes and spoke my final prayer aloud. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Forgive Philip for his greed. Forgive the judges for their injustice. Forgive all who participated in this persecution. Accept my death as penance for whatever sins I have truly committed, and grant mercy to my brothers who have already died in this purge. Into your hands I commend my spirit." I heard Matthias speaking similar words on his platform, heard the crowd fall silent, heard something like a sob from the young executioner who stood behind me. And then I heard a voice from the crowd, a woman's voice calling out, "Stop! In the name of justice and mercy, stop this execution!" The executioner's hand froze on the lever. Guards moved toward the woman who had spoken, but she was already pushing through the crowd toward the platform, her hood fallen back to reveal the face of someone I recognized but could not immediately place. She was Sister Marie, a woman who had run the hospital attached to our commandery, who had worked alongside us for 20 years, tending the sick and wounded, who had been one of the few outside the order to speak publicly in our defense when the arrests began. She climbed onto my platform despite the guards trying to pull her back, and she addressed the crowd with a voice that rang clear across the square. "These men are innocent. I worked beside them for 20 years, saw their devotion, witnessed their service, knew their character. They are no more heretics than I am a witch. This execution is murder dressed in legal robes, and you who watch are complicit if you do not speak against it." The guards seized her, began dragging her away, but her words had struck something in the crowd, awakened some doubt about the justice of what they were witnessing. Other voices began to call out, questioning, protesting, and I heard confusion in the executioner's breathing behind me as he waited for orders about how to proceed. A royal official mounted the platform, his face red with anger, and he shouted to the crowd, "This woman is disturbed, deceived by heretics into believing their lies." The trial was just, the evidence overwhelming, the sentence righteous. "These men will hang as decreed, and anyone who interferes will join them." He signaled to the executioner to proceed, but the young man did not move, stood frozen behind me with his hand still on the lever, clearly torn between his orders and something else, something that my forgiveness and Sister Marie's testimony had awakened in him. The official turned to berate him, to command him to do his duty, and in that moment of distraction I spoke again, loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "I forgive you all, every person who brought me here, every person who watches, every person who participates in this injustice. I forgive you because that is what Christ did, what faith requires, what love demands even toward enemies. Let my death stand as testimony that the order served faithfully despite our imperfections, that we did not deserve this end, but we will meet it with grace rather than hatred. Remember us, not as the heretics Philip's lies painted us, but as men who tried to serve God and who chose mercy even in our final moments." The executioner stepped away from the lever, his face streaming with tears, and he spoke to the official with quiet determination. "I cannot do this. I cannot hang men who forgive me even as I prepare to kill them. Find another executioner, because I will not participate in this murder." The official stared at him in shock, then called for guards to arrest him for disobedience, but the guards hesitated, looking at each other uncertainly, clearly affected by what they had witnessed. The crowd's murmur grew louder, voices calling for mercy, for justice, for the execution to be stopped. And in that moment of chaos, of certainty crumbling, of a narrative collapsing under the weight of simple human decency, I felt hope flicker in my chest. Not hope that I would be spared, but hope that perhaps our forgiveness had accomplished something, had planted seeds that might grow into questions about the persecution that had destroyed the order. But the moment passed. The royal official called for the captain of the guard, who brought order back to the square with threats and shows of force. A new executioner was found, a harder man who did not meet our eyes, who moved with mechanical efficiency as he prepared to complete the task his predecessor had refused. Sister Marie was dragged away, still shouting our innocence. The crowd was pushed back, controlled, prevented from interfering further. And I understood that we were going to die after all, that the brief disruption had changed nothing about our fate, even if it had changed something about its meaning. I looked at Brother Matthias and saw peace on his face now, the peace I had found earlier, the recognition that we had done what we could, had offered forgiveness when hatred would have been easier, had witnessed to our faith in the way that mattered most. "Thank you, Jean," he called to me. "Thank you for showing me how to die with grace. I am ready now." I nodded to him, my brother in faith and suffering, and I turned my face toward the grey Parisian sky, and I waited for the end. The platform dropped. I felt the rope catch, felt my neck strain under my weight, felt the terrible pressure as breath was denied and consciousness began to fade. But I also felt something else, a presence, a warmth, a certainty that I was not alone in this moment, that the forgiveness I had offered had been accepted by one greater than any earthly judge, that my death was not the end, but a passage into something beyond pain or injustice or the petty cruelties of men who believed they could destroy faith by destroying those who carried it. My last thought was a prayer. "Father, receive me as you received your Son. Let my forgiveness stand as testimony to your mercy. Let my death count for something in the economy of grace that transcends human understanding." And then there was darkness, and then there was light, and then I was standing in a place that held no pain, facing a presence that needed no name, knowing that I had done what I was called to do, that I had kept my vows to the very end, that forgiveness offered in the shadow of death had power beyond anything I could have imagined. But this is not where my story ends, though it is where my life concluded. What I learned in the months after my execution, learned from a perspective beyond earthly knowing, was that the seeds planted by our forgiveness grew in unexpected ways. The young executioner who had refused to hang us became convinced of our innocence, spoke publicly about what he had witnessed, faced persecution himself for defending the memory of condemned heretics. Sister Marie continued her advocacy, recorded our testimony, preserved our story for those who would come later seeking truth about what had happened to the temple. The crowd that watched our execution carried away questions about the justice of what they had witnessed, questions that made them more skeptical of royal authority, more willing to doubt official narratives about guilt and innocence. And most importantly, the example of two knights facing death with forgiveness rather than hatred became a story that spread through France and beyond, a testament that faith could survive even the worst persecution, that grace could triumph even in moments of absolute defeat. I tell this story now from beyond the veil that separates earthly existence from whatever comes after. Tell it to those who still walk in the world of flesh and struggle. Tell it because the lessons I learned in my final moments matter beyond my individual life. I was condemned unjustly, tortured for refusing to lie, executed for crimes I never committed. Everything was taken from me, my freedom, my reputation, my life. And in losing everything, I discovered the one thing that could not be taken, the choice to forgive, to show mercy, to die without hatred poisoning my soul. That choice was harder than any battle I fought, more demanding than any hardship I endured, more costly than any sacrifice I had previously made. But it was also the truest thing I ever did, the most genuine expression of the faith I had claimed to hold, the final and most complete keeping of the vows I had spoken 32 years earlier when I believed service meant fighting with swords rather than dying with grace. To those who read this account, who learn of my life and death centuries after the events occurred, I offer this. Forgiveness is not weakness. Showing mercy to those who destroy you is not surrender. Dying without hatred is not defeat. These are the hardest forms of strength, the most difficult expressions of courage, the truest victories available to those who claim to follow a God who forgave his own executioners. I was a condemned Templar knight who faced the gallows and forgave his executioners. And in forgiving, I discovered what it truly means to keep faith when keeping faith costs everything, to show love when love seems absurd, to trust that grace matters even when grace cannot save our lives. The order fell, destroyed by greed and lies and the corruption of men who wore crowns and claimed authority from God. But the principles we stood for, honor, sacrifice, service, mercy, those principles survived in the stories people told about knights who died forgiving their killers, about faith maintained through the worst persecution, about grace offered when grace was the only gift left to give. I do not know if my forgiveness changed Philip's heart or moved him to repentance. I suspect it did not. He died comfortable in his wealth, convinced of his righteousness, untroubled by the innocent lives he had destroyed. But my forgiveness changed me, transformed my death from bitter defeat into something that felt like victory, allowed me to meet my end without the poison of hatred corroding my final moments. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is all we can ever hope for. Not to change our persecutors, but to prevent them from changing us. Not to avoid suffering, but to suffer with grace. Not to escape death, but to die as we lived, faithful to the vows we spoke and the God we served, even when both seemed to demand the impossible. Non nobis Domine non nobis, sed nomini tuo da gloriam. Not unto us, O Lord, not unto us, but to thy name give glory. I lived these words and I died speaking them. And I discovered that giving glory to God sometimes means forgiving those who destroy us, showing mercy to those who show us none, choosing love over hatred, even when hatred feels justified and love feels impossible. This is my legacy, humble as it may be. The testimony of one knight who faced injustice and responded with grace, who was condemned falsely and chose forgiveness, who died at the hands of executioners. He pardoned even as they ended his life. Remember this if you remember nothing else, that faith is proven not when it makes our lives comfortable, but when it sustains us through the worst suffering. That grace is most real when it is hardest to offer. That forgiveness given in the shadow of death has power to transform, not just the one who forgives, but all who witness the forgiving. I forgave them, all of them. And in forgiving, I was freed from chains more binding than any they could have placed on my body. That freedom is what I carry now into whatever comes after. That freedom is my victory over those who thought they had defeated me. That freedom is the gift I offer to any who face similar injustice and wonder whether maintaining faith and showing mercy is worth the cost. It is worth it. It has always been worth it. And it will be worth it when you face your own moment of testing, your own choice between hatred and grace, your own opportunity to prove that faith means something beyond words, that forgiveness is possible even in impossible circumstances, that love can triumph even when love leads to the gallows.